Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. This edition is a NetGalley special. I've received a number of books from NetGalley and I realized I was getting behind, so I kind of did a big push. And so here are 6 books that I've read recently that I received from NetGalley and the publishers for review. So let's just jump right in. The first book that I read was called The Figure in the Photograph by Kevin Sullivan, and I will put the picture up here. This came out on April 23rd, so I'm a little bit behind. Published by Allison and Busby. This is a historical mystery and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 stars. And I think that's because it had some unique elements that I really liked. So the book opens in Cuba in 1897. Now I don't know actually a ton about Cuban history, so I looked it up so that I could get kind of my bearings a little bit. But it opens in 1897, which is in the middle of the War of Independence in Cuba. They were ruled by Spain and were fighting for independence. Our main character is called Juan. Juan and his father are in Cuba taking photographs. They're both photographers and they're taking photographs for a publishing house, photographs of buildings in Cuba. And they're a very interesting pair, Juan and his father. His father was born in Cuba but moved to Spain and spent most of his life in Spain. Juan was born in Scotland. His mother is Scottish, and then moved early in his life to Spain. And so it's a very international kind of feel. It's great. I really enjoyed that. Anyway, while they're there, Juan's father is shot while he is trying to get a picture of a cathedral, the city that they're in. I forget what it's called. Fighting starts to happen and some bullets hit the facade, and he realizes that if he's going to get a picture of this cathedral before it's heavily damaged, he needs to go right away. And so he is shot while attempting to do that. And so Juan then needs to wrap up his father's affairs, and then he ends up then back in Scotland winding up his father's affairs. He is in Glasgow, and while he is there, he becomes very interested in something called serial photography. He looks at images of the same scene at specified intervals. So he sets his camera up and he takes pictures. At first he took them like an hour or more apart, like 4 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, and then he realized that it's more helpful to take them apart at equal intervals. So he takes pictures at 45-minute intervals of the exact same scene, and then he observes them to see what the differences are in the pictures. Really fascinating. I really enjoy photography, so I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. Anyways, while he's testing out a new timer that he had built for his camera, it took pictures of a scene where across the street a woman had been killed, and his pictures came in very helpful in finding the murderer. And so the police actually asked him to help them out. There have been 5 killings in a specific area in Glasgow, and they asked him to set his cameras up and take some pictures in the hopes that he will find some information that will be helpful to them. These killings, the bodies were all dismembered. Their arms and their legs were taken away and just the torso was left behind, so it's very unusual. And all of this takes place in June of 1899, so it's been a couple of years since his father passed away. I loved the setting and the time period of this book. It was a time of scientific discovery, and I thought the author did a really good job of highlighting that aspect in the book. As I said, I love photography, and I really enjoyed that aspect of learning more about historic photography and techniques. I thought that it was a unique look at an investigation, looking at it from the point of a photographer taking these serial photographs and then looking at them for clues to a murderer. There was great characters, and I really would love to know what's next for Juan. So this is supposed to be the first in a series, and I hope there are more, because I would definitely read them. And then I read The Talented Mr. Varg by Alexander McCall Smith. I always love Alexander McCall Smith, and so I was fully expecting to enjoy this book, and I really did. This is the second in his series, in his Sensitive Crimes Unit series, and I gave it 4 stars. This one was published on April 28th by Penguin Random House Canada. And this is a series that's set in Sweden, which I enjoy. It's a little bit different. Ulf Varg is the main character, and he is the detective inspector in the Sensitive Crimes Department of the Criminal Investigation Authority for the city of Malmo in Sweden. And as always with Alexander McCall Smith, it was a meandering journey, this story, and I really did enjoy that. It was funny and it was unexpected, and I can highly recommend this series and this book, The Talented Mr. Varg. Or Varg? I'm not entirely sure. And then I read The Fool's Folly by Keith Moray. This was another historical mystery that I loved. I gave this one 4.5 stars too. This was published on May 18th by Sapir, and it is also the second in a series. So I am going to go back and try and find the first book to read in the series for sure. This is a series that's set at Sandal Castle in West Yorkshire. Now, one thing that I found fascinating, I didn't read anything about the author or the series before I read the book. I like to go in blind. But after I was done, I looked it up. And it's a series. The 3rd book is coming out next year. And the series is set around a place rather than a person, which I find very interesting. And so it's set at Sandal Castle, but also in very different time periods. So the first book in the series is set in 1322, I think, and this second book in the series is set in 1485. So I find that really fascinating and really intriguing. And so the main character in this book is Sir Giles. He is the constable of the castle and the judge to the manor of Wakefield Court. And I really liked Sir Giles Beeston. He was a great character, a really interesting investigator, and I really appreciated his sense of justice and how seriously he took his position. There was some interesting kind of historical elements in the book that were highlighted that I really enjoyed. Like, they just came out as part of the story, but really helped you feel like you were in that time period. And one of those things is called the doctrine of signatures. So Sir Giles is having a conversation with the physician at the hospital. He gets these really bad headaches. He has an injury to his eye in a war or in a battle. He lost his eye, and there's a bit of a scar and stuff, and so he experiences some pain. So he goes to the physician for some relief, for some tonic, and they have this conversation about the doctrine of signatures, which is true, which is a real medical belief, which was that plants have signatures that let us know what they are good for. So for example, in the book, they talked about a flower that is shaped like a helmet is good for headaches and wounds to the head. So I thought that was a really interesting little piece of historical information. So in this story, the jester of the castle, Ned Bunce, he's found dead in the moat, and then 2 more bodies are also found killed the next day. And so Sir Giles is set to investigate, and he sets up what looks essentially like a coroner's court, although he's not a coroner per se, but he gets a jury to sit and listen. He has a really strong sense of justice that I appreciated, and an understanding that the law and justice are not always the same thing. He has a firm belief that the law applies to all and that all deserve justice, and I really enjoyed that. So I thought it was a great mystery, an interesting part of history. It was fast-paced with great characters. I can highly recommend that series and The Fool's Folly by Keith Moray. And then I read The Women of Waterloo Bridge by Jan Cassie. This came out on May 21st, published by Area. And this is also a historical fiction. It's set during World War II in London. And one thing, I think what grabbed my attention and why I requested this book is that it is about 3 women who got jobs in construction during World War II, and they were working on the new Waterloo Bridge. So what intrigued me was that it was a World War II historical fiction, but it had women doing a job that I have not read about before in books. There's a lot about nurses or ambulance drivers or the land girls, all that side of it, but I've never read about women who worked in construction, and I found that really intriguing. And so I ended up being quite disappointed because there wasn't enough of that in the book. So these 3 women, Evelyn, Gwen, and Joan, and all 3 of them they're very different women, but they all end up working on the bridge. And so I would have loved to have had the story more focused on their work on the bridge. Instead, it was really focused on their personal lives. And the book also had a really interesting structure that I couldn't decide if I liked or not. And so the first 3 chapters are set in London, December 1940. We get a chapter titled Evelyn, and then Gwen, and then Joan. And each chapter covers about 3 or 4 months from each of their perspectives. So it's third person, omniscient, but each chapter focuses on a different woman. And then the rest of the book, the following chapters cover a 4-month period from one woman's perspective, and it always goes Evelyn, Gwen, Joan, Evelyn, Gwen, Joan. So what ends up happening is you move ahead quickly, and the book actually covers the entire war, but you only ever get 4 months of one woman, and then there's 8 months where you don't know what happens to them. There's a little bit in the other chapters, but not a huge amount. Evelyn and Gwen end up with some interaction because they actually work together on the bridge and they become friends, but not really with Joan. And so it was this really bizarre kind of a structure that I ended up deciding that I didn't really like, because I felt distanced from the characters because of that choice of structure. And so that was interesting. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. It was okay, but I think that it would have been maybe better if she had mixed up the order a bit, or I don't know, chose to tell it in a slightly different way. I also would have preferred if there was more about their actual work on the bridge and a little less about their personal lives, because that's what I had found interesting about the story. I didn't like the resolution for Gwen. I felt like we just didn't get enough of it firsthand. And so I think because of the structure, what ended up, it felt more like vignettes, that it was slices of life during the war rather than one overarching story. So yeah. That's my thoughts on that book. If you like World War II historical fiction, give it a try. It might work. That structure might work for you. I'd actually love to know, if you've read this book, let me know what you thought of the structure like that. I've got a cup of coffee this morning in my Crayola mug, which I love. Okay, the next book that I read was called A Village Murder by Frances Evesham. And this was published, this will be coming out June 23rd, so it's coming up really soon, published by Boldwood Books. And this is a modern day cozy mystery set in Somerset. So in this book, there's two main characters, Imogen Bishop, and she's a landscape architect. And she has to go back home. Her father runs a hotel and he has been killed. So she goes home for his funeral. And on the day of the funeral, her and Adam Hennessy, who runs the pub across the road called The Plough, he is also a retired DCI. The two of them find the body of her estranged husband in the orangery on the grounds of the hotel. And of course, the police question her, and rightly so. She is the spouse of the deceased and she found him. But the two of them do some investigating because, you know, they want to know what's going on. And so yeah, there was some questions begin to arise about the death of her father, whether it was an accident or not. It was a car accident. There's also some secrets from the past that are involved, people that she was at high school with. And so there's that involved as well. It was good. It was a good cozy mystery. I gave it 3 stars. There was one thing that kind of irked me, and that's that Imogen chooses to lie to the police. And it's because she's not convinced that they won't pin the murder on somebody rather than actually investigate it. And I didn't understand that belief in her lack of trust in the police. It wasn't set up by anything really in her past that she would have this lack of trust. And so I didn't like that she lied to them. However, she does get called out on it later, which I appreciated. I thought that was good. So anyway, yeah, it was a good standard cozy mystery, an enjoyable setting. I liked the characters other than her lying of Imogen and Adam. I actually really liked Adam. He was a good character. And then finally, I read The Rat Began to Gnaw the Rope by C.W. Grafton. And this is put out by Poisoned Pen Press. This is a book that was originally published in 1943. It's the first book that he wrote. C.W. Grafton is the father of Sue Grafton, and he wrote 4 books. 3 of them were crime novels. And so this is being republished, reprinted, as part of the Library of Congress Crimes Classics. And I am a huge fan and massive supporter of reprinting classics from the crime genre that have been out of print. So I really like the British Library Crime Classics, for example, and I'd never heard of the Library of Congress Crime Classics, but I'm glad I did, and I'm glad I read this one, and I hope that they put out more in this series. I really think that there is so much to be gained from reprinting these classics that have been out of print. So it was originally published in 1943, which is very interesting because that's right in the middle of the war. But there is no mention of the war in the book, which does not surprise me, actually, because when you're in the middle of it, you don't want to read about that. You want to read about, you know, something else. You kind of want to escape from that. So that doesn't surprise me at all. But I did appreciate that the author put a note about the war at the end of the book. He acknowledged it and he acknowledged the sacrifice that people were making during the war. So I liked that at the end of the book. So in this book, Gil Henry is a lawyer, and he gets hired by Ruth McClure to find out the true price of some stock. Her father has recently died. He had some stock in the company that he worked for, and she wants to know what the true price is, which Gil finds intriguing. And so he starts to look into it. And this is a classic hard-boiled style mystery. So he gets, the poor guy, he's trying to investigate this and people don't like him. He gets threatened with jail and he gets beaten up in a classic true form of a hard-boiled mystery. This was a really enjoyable read. I gave it 4 stars. I found it really interesting to learn more about social history, what was going on at the time. And the Library of Congress, when they put this book together, I really liked how they chose to format it. It included an introduction with information about the author and the story, and it included endnotes at the end of every chapter that explained things that I would be unfamiliar with that were kind of common in 1943. So I really enjoyed that as well. Unlike other hard-boiled mysteries of the time, Grafton's book included an element of humor, which I appreciated. And so yeah, I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. So those are the 6 books I've read recently from NetGalley, that I've received from NetGalley. Oh, and I'm not sure if I said, but this was published on June 2nd. So 5 of these 6 have already been published. Have you read any of these books? I'd love to hear your thoughts about them down in the comment section below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.